Thank you. Such a great turnout. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Truly honored. And so my name's Stephen. I'm the chair of the Senior Medical Staff Association at the Women's. And yeah, I was charged with organizing this event. And without your attendance, it wouldn't be a success. So I'd like to thank each and every one of you. Okay, so before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri and Burung people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present, as well as to elders and community members who may be here today. So I have some special thanks. I'd like to thank the board members who are here today, in particular our chairwoman, so it's a great honor to have you here. I'd also like to thank the strategic executive team members who are here today, and so many heads of units here and head of departments. It's wonderful to have you here today. I'd like to thank the descendants of Drs. Tracy and Drs. Maund, in whose honor we hold this event here today, and thank you for being here. And the family of Professor Quinn, apparently they're here in abundance today. Thank you very much for coming. All right. So, sorry, a bit of administrative steps here. If you are interested in joining the Senior Medical Staff Association, you can scan this QR code and then you can sign up, okay? Because without your support, we wouldn't be able to hold events like this. We have 90 members, thank you, thank you to those of you who are current members. We've had the Career Celebrations Day where we invited alumni to come back and network. We've had the annual Senior Medical Staff Dinner, the most recent of which was at Cutler & Co, and a number of alumni attended as well. And we have tonight's event, which is the main event. I've been engaged in a lot of advocacy for the senior medical staff. Obviously, I can do more, but yeah, and so with your support, I can keep this going. Two, this is really important for those of you who need to accumulate CPD points. So scan that, fill in your name, your email address, and you'll get a certificate of attendance with 1 hour CPD for educational activity within minutes. Okay, so do that. Without much further ado, let me introduce our speaker for tonight. It is my great honor to introduce our distinguished TracyMaundOrator for this evening, Professor Michael Quinn, AM. Professor Quinn's career spans decades of exceptional service in the field of gynecological oncology. After graduating from the University of Glasgow in 1973, he completed specialist training in Canada before becoming a consultant at the Royal Women's Hospital here in Melbourne, where he also served as Director of Oncology from 1988 to 2008. During his tenure, Professor Quinn made substantial contributions to improving cancer care for women, not only in Australia, but internationally. His work has been recognized with numerous honors, including being named Victorian of the Year and receiving the Order of Australia AM in 2015 for his significant contributions to gynecological oncology. As a co-founder of the Australian Society of Gynecological Oncologists and the Australian-New Zealand Gynecological Oncology Group, Professor Quinn has been at the forefront of clinical and research leadership in the fight against women's cancers. He has chaired major international societies and co-chaired the FIGO Oncology Committee. Over his career, Professor Quinn has published over 350 papers, raised more than $1 million for cancer research, and significantly enhanced oncology services at the Royal Women's Hospital. Most notably, his lifelong dedication to improving outcomes for women with gynecological cancers has had a profound impact, particularly in underserved communities. Please join me in welcoming Professor Michael Quinn, AM, a visionary in women's cancer care, to deliver the 2024 TracyMaundOrator. Oh, yes, yeah.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming along. Before I start, I just wanted to recount a conversation I had earlier today. Someone called me and said, "Are you excited about giving the talk tonight?" And I said, "I'm not really excited, I'm actually petrified." And they said, "Well, you've given hundreds of talks, why are you petrified?" And the reason I'm petrified, Stephen, is for the first time I've got my family here. So Stephen, if there's any heckling, If you point security to that corner, you know that they're the offenders. So chair of medical staff, chair of the board of the Women's, Richard Walpole, the great-grandson of Richard Tracy. Thank you for the honor of inviting me to give this oration today. I'm going to take you back to 1850. This is a fantastic article in the Sydney Morning Herald. Sydneysiders, of course, adore Melbournians. A worse regulated, worse governed, worse drained, worse lighted, worse watered town of note is not on the face of the globe, and that a population more thoroughly disposed in every grade to cheating and robbery, open and covert, does not exist. That in no other place does immorality stalk abroad so unblushingly, I love that term, and so unchecked. That in no other place does mammon rule so triumphant. That in no other place is the public money so wantonly squandered without giving the slightest protection to life or property. That in no other place are the administrative functions of government so inefficiently managed. That in a word, nowhere in the southern hemisphere does chaos reign so triumphant as in Melbourne. So this is mid-19th century Melbourne. And there are a lot of women on the periphery of society. Women who are being disadvantaged. Poor women, widowed women, women who have been deserted by their partners. And remember, the gold rush is beginning to start. Men are coming over from Adelaide and coming down from Sydney. They're coming from abroad. And they are, shall we say, not the best sort of characters. Single mothers. All of these women on the fringes of society were excluded from access to adequate health services. The number of infants and women dying in childbirth at this time began to rise, and there had to be an answer. And this is where Tracy and Maund come in, and hopefully I can go through with you the enormous contribution that they made at that time. So Richard Tracy was an Irishman who was born in Limerick, and he began his medical studies in 1845 in Dublin. In the old days, there used to be an apprenticeship system whereby you were apprenticed to a surgeon and you followed that surgeon around for 3 or 4 years and you got your degree. And it all changed in 1845, and 3 years later he graduated as a licentiate of the Royal College of Surgeons. And so you could go out into practice at that time, but if you wanted to further your studies, you usually went to mainland Europe, or if you were really smart, you went to Glasgow. Why are you laughing? And this is the first reference he got. And I think it tells you about the man. I think if anyone in the room had a first reference like this, you'd be pretty pleased with yourselves. I've known Surgeon Richard Tracy while pursuing his professional studies in Dublin, and feel much pleasure in testifying to the zeal, intelligence, and persevering assiduity evidenced by him in the acquirement of every department of medical knowledge, as well as to the uniformly gentlemanly bearing of his conduct, and I have no doubt that his future career will be crowned with that honour and success which his talent and his attainments so well deserve, and which all who know him join in wishing him. What a first reference. It's a cracker, isn't it? Now, I'm going to talk to you about the man from 3 characteristics. As a surgeon, as an academic at the University of Melbourne, but above all, I'm going to talk to you about his altruism, because that's going to lead me into what we're doing in low and middle income countries for women with cancer. So this is a man whose first job was in the cholera hospital in Glasgow. Now in 1832, there was a cholera epidemic. 6,000 people died in Glasgow from that epidemic, and the hospital continued, and so a job in a cholera hospital was not one without risk. Next year, he got his MD from Glasgow with honours, and it's notable that during that year, he received a cheque from Cashing's Toon of Ballincar for services to the poor of Laura in Tipperary. And we think Laura was the name originally ascribed to Lara, which is just east of Geelong, as you know, and that gives you some idea of the historical background to this. Now, the University of Melbourne traditionally granted the MD to graduates of English, Scottish, and Irish schools. And in 1857, Tracy and Maund, being of that number, were graduated as a degree of doctor in medicine, and a year later, Brownless founded the medical faculty. In 1964, 6 years after the faculty was established, he was appointed as the first lecturer in obstetric medicine and diseases of women and children at the university at the princely sum of £100 annually. Now, this is the first report of the cholera hospital in 1832. It came from the professor of surgery in the Anderson School, and it depicts what went on at that time. And I just thought I'd show you this map because it will bring back some happy memories to someone in this room called Janet Duke. Because up here is Albion Street, and just north of Albion Street is a street called Rotten Row. And Rotten Row was the home of the Royal Maternity Hospital, where Janet Duke learned how to deliver babies. Albion Street, where the hospital is also close to my heart, because my granny was born in the Gallowgate over here. And her life was spent looking after 2 children as a single mother eventually. And she had a little newsagent shop in Albion Street. So the circle has come full circle. I thought I'd throw this in because this is where Mark Umstad trained, and I thought it would bring a tear to his eye. This is the Queen Mother's Hospital in Glasgow. You remember this, Mark? So Richard Tracy was known, first of all, as a surgeon. He was thought to have performed the first ovarian tumour removal in Australia, but Frank Foster tells us in his 1965 epigraph, Ian Ross, 64, I knew it, thank you, that George Mayo at the Adelaide Hospital was first to do the operation, and his patient survived. Unfortunately, Edward Barker at the Melbourne and John Cruikshank didn't have as good a result for their patients, and Richard Tracy in 1864 operated in a private home for the first time, removing an ovarian tumour which had previously been aspirated. 2.5 gallons was the last aspirate. It was probably a large benign ovarian tumour. And interestingly, his anaesthetist was Dr. Motherwell. Now, Motherwell is just outside of Glasgow. And isn't that a great name for an anaesthetist looking after women? Motherwell. I thought that was really nice. Now, John Maund was a different character. First of all, he was English, and that's just an accident of birth. But he had the common sense to study at Glasgow with academic distinction and went to St Pancras to do his internship. He got his diploma from the College of Surgeons in 1845, and then, as a lot of doctors did, went to Paris to further his studies. He was awarded an MD from the University of St Andrews, which is in Scotland, in 1849, and arrived in Australia on the Janet Mitchell in 1853. What I didn't know, and when I was doing my research, I was really surprised that he and Joseph Black were the founding editors of the Australian Medical Journal. Now, his main love was chemistry. That was his number one thing. And he was eventually appointed as to the new Office of Analytical Chemistry by the government. His most important work was checking the water in the Yan Yean water scheme, and he checked a lot of other waters, including the water of the Plenty River. So he was really a chemist who somehow managed to get a medical degree, but was more preoccupied with different things than looking after patients. So let's get back to the Women's Hospital. It was a Melbourne lying-in hospital. It was established in 1856, and Tracy and Maund were the physicians. But really it was run by a group of women headed up by Frances Perry, the wife of Bishop Charles Perry. She had 19 people on her committee. Can you imagine working with a committee of 19 people? And if you can look closely, you can see they were all Mrs. There were no Ms. To be seen, all married women, which of course was reflecting the time. This is a map of the city of Melbourne. Right in the middle you can see East Melbourne, which is now really Melbourne. Collingwood was there early on, Carlton early on, and so on. This is a time when football was beginning to start. 1858 saw the Melbourne and Geelong, and then 6 years later, the Mighty Blues were established in Carlton. And I have it, Richard Walpole, that he was a Carlton supporter on the best of authorities. Not a word. I've blown this up a bit, just to show you where the first hospital was. North-south going this way, east-west going that way. And the star is on Albert Street, and it's number 41 Albert Street, and this is what it looked like on the left. There was a church down there on the corner of Hoddle Street, and the top story was the story that the patients were delivered in. So 2 years later, they obviously outgrew this small peripheral hospital, and they moved to Carlton. And this edifice here is looking onto Swanson Street, and that's where the Women's Hospital was for so many years, and which we all remember with great affection. So Frances Perry was the chair from 1856 to 1874, and she really was a leader in the charitable business, being the wife of the bishop. Importantly, she was the president of the Melbourne Orphan Asylum, and I'm going to talk about the effect of cancer on women and a subsequent number of orphans that we see globally. She had 7 daughters. Lucky her. Now, why was it called the lying-in hospital? And it was called the lying-in hospital because in those days you had your confinement and then you stayed in hospital for a month. Until the 1970s, standard postpartum care involved 10 days in hospital, and to the delight of many women, the newborn baby was taken to the nursery overnight. Poor old Charles Perry is neglected. He was the first bishop, and the great story is about his wife, but Charles Perry contributed enormously to Melbourne, and he was responsible for getting Melbourne Grammar up and on the go, getting Geelong Grammar up and on the go, and in 1870 he laid the foundation stone to Trinity College at the university. So he was quite a guy, Charles Perry. So I'm going to talk to you today about improving cancer outcomes for women in low-income countries, and basically it's continuing the altruism of Richard Tracy, in particular, John Maund, and Frances Perry. Now, this old bloke gave me some advice when I landed in Australia in 1978. And I was giving my first lecture, and you remember you prepared overheads at that time. And Roger said to me, "This is what you do. Tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you've told them." So I'm going to tell you what I'm going to talk about. Richard Tracy and John Maund were champions for the care of disadvantaged women. And their actions, I believe, are a metaphor for our duty to continue that legacy. And I'm going to share with you today just how we've been pretty successful in continuing the legacy of Richard Tracy and John Maund. So here's the challenge. What is our responsibility as a community to look after patients outwith of our own region, outwith of our own country? How the Royal Women's Hospital and the rest of Australia have continued in this spirit of altruism has made an enormous difference. And there are 7 areas I'm going to go through with you. The first one about the IGCS, International Gynecological Cancer Society, global curriculum. And my son Mark, who's a teacher, will relate to this because these are the first words of the Hippocratic Oath. People think the Hippocratic Oath is about doing no harm. It's not actually. It's about teaching and training. To consider dear to me, as my parents, him who taught me, to live in common with him, and if necessary, to share my goods with him. So Hippocrates understood the real importance of teaching and training. And this is what we've got to think about in our region. In the blue, we see the number of cases worldwide, and in the red, we see the mortality. And in the top 4 regions, Eastern Africa, Southern Africa, Middle Africa, and then number 4 is Melanesia. And Melanesia is on our doorstep. So this is who we have in Melanesia. We have the Solomons, Vanuatu, New Caledonia, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Nauru, and on the periphery, Tonga, Kiribati, and Tuvalu. They're just small islands. They're not worth thinking about. Well, they are worth thinking about. And the reason that we've got to think about these islands is that the incidence of gynecological cancer, number 2 and number 3 of the most common cancers in Melanesia, is increasing. Endometrial cancer rates are on the rise because of the diet. A diagnosis of ovarian cancer is catastrophic. And look at the numbers. We're talking hundreds of thousands of women dying. Worldwide, cancer of the cervix is the biggest killer of women when it comes to gynecological cancer. In 2020, 342,000 women died, and the vast majority of these women died in low and middle income countries, and they died untreated, uncared for, and unloved. These women would have developed hemorrhage, pain, vaginal discharge, urinary leak, fecal leak. They would have been ostracized from the communities. And this is what we have to turn around. 9 out of 10 people in low-income countries cannot access surgical care. I've highlighted this very important observation, that the more patients you operate in one center, by centralizing care, we know we improve outcomes for those women. And we've just demonstrated the need for greater surgical care is in sub-Saharan Africa and in Melanesia. In 2018, Tedros, who was the Secretary General of WHO, said his major impact was to try and eliminate cervix cancer by 2030, and that was a huge challenge. And we can eliminate it. We can eliminate it by HPV vaccination, by screening with HPV tests or even smear tests, and we can certainly improve outcomes by appropriate treatment. This is my most important slide. It's the comment that moved me when I heard it from Professor Mahmoud Fatala. He was the president of FIGO. He's a great champion of women's reproductive rights. And look what he had to say. Women are not dying of diseases we cannot treat. They're dying because societies have yet to decide that their lives are worth saving. Now that resonated with me. It really did. And it's certainly been at the back of my mind over the last 20 years as I've tried to move things forward. Have a look at this slide. Because the downstream effect of women dying from these cancer is leaving a huge number of orphans. Worldwide, 4.4 million cancer deaths, resulting in 1 million orphans globally. And if we just take cancer of the cervix, and we think of those 342,000 women dying, this will generate 200,000 new orphans, 1 million orphans over 5 years. So we've got to do something about it. Why has the training in these countries been neglected? I think we've been a bit ignorant just how bad it is. I think we've assumed that subspecialty training is impossible in the third world, and it's impossible for us to be there to help. We've not acknowledged that if we centralize care and have trained doctors, that the outcomes will be improved. And remember, you're dealing with countries where the priorities are going to be different. If you are the Minister for Health in Malawi, you're more occupied with making sure your water's clean and there's enough water, that you've got your population vaccinated and so on. So cancer is low on your list of priorities, and that's why I think it's been neglected. And unfortunately, I think there has been a downstream effect of colonialism and patriarchy, which has said that these women are not worth saving. So my question to my colleagues in 2015 was, why can we not develop a curriculum in gynecologic oncology training that is acceptable globally? In Miami in 2015, the Society of Gynecologic Oncology, SGO, that you see here, I invited members of the SGO to come and talk with IGCS. I was running our education committee at that time, and I thought we'd get half a dozen people. We got 68 people interested in trying to improve outcomes. We observed that there were some existing ad hoc, unstructured programs in Africa and Latin America, and there was one program getting started in Cambodia and one planned for Fiji. I managed to persuade them that we should shorten timelines. I said, let's get a curriculum up in 2 years and let's get the first fellow on her feet training in 2 years' time. And to get that, we had agreement from the people in the room that any program that we had to be structured. It's very important, sustainable, equivalent to any program in a first world country, HIC, high income country. It should be an exit exam, and there should be a certificate of training. And this is how it looks, or how it looked. It's a 2-year program. It's a flexible curriculum. And what I did is I went to the American college, the Australian college, and the British college, and I said, we want an international curriculum. Can I pinch your curriculums? And I cut and pasted what I thought were the best parts of each curriculum. So I plagiarized very successfully. The concept is of international trainers and local trainers working together to keep the fellows, the trainees in the country, so they don't come to Australia, they don't go to the US, they get their training and they stay there. So we have a weekly contact with international mentors. There's no obstetric training, so they're just doing gynecology mostly and gynecologic oncology. There's a tumor board every month. And originally we planned that the fellows would spend 3 months in the host institution so they could see how a cancer unit actually worked. That has fiddled back to 1 month because these fellows have got families, and 3 months probably was an overkill, and 1 month has worked out very well. They have to do a research program, they get an exit exam and a certificate, and IGCS currently does the funding. It costs $40,000 US to train one fellow for those 2 years, and we've had to find the funding for that. So here's how it works. You've got institutions in high resource regions. They partner with institutions in low resource regions. The fellows follow the web-based curriculum. They participate in monthly videos and with our mentors and monthly tumor boards. The international members fly in for 2 or 3 weeks every year from the host institution. They fly in. Amazing commitment. And they spend time teaching surgery, assessing how the fellows are doing, and making sure that they're getting appropriate training. We evaluate the fellows through evaluation reports completed by the local and international mentors. They have a surgical case log, they have project actual tumor board participation, and we give them periodic multi-choice question exams. And you can see they get the exam at the end, and then they get their certificates. This is a great slide. This is the brain drain. And it does look a bit like a brain drain. And the aim is to keep these fellows from ending up in the first world, because we really don't want to train people who are not going to stay in their own regions. And Australia is pretty bad at this. This is from a Scotsman who immigrated to Australia, I know. And so you can see here that this is British doctors being sucked into coming to Australia, but also now doctors from India and Malaysia. There's a degree of ethical uncertainty and, shall we say, immorality about this. And I don't think governments actually think about it, but I think it's getting to be more and more unacceptable. So what happens at grassroots level is we send our assessment team into the potential sites. They look at suitability and especially looking at how good the local clinicians are, how good's the anesthesia, blood bank, pathology being the cornerstone of the care of patients. Very, very important. You get the pathology wrong, then your patients are not going to get the right treatment. And there has to be some facility for follow-up, and I'll talk about that later. We have to get the Director of Medical Services to provide Wi-Fi, to provide computers, research time, tumor echo time, and no obstetric call. Senior clinicians who have hitherto been undertaking the surgery, they act as the local mentors. And if you've got the local university on side, then it's a big bonus, because they're usually the makers. Now, our international mentors have to leave for 2 or 4 weeks every year, and someone's got to cover them. And this is a great time for me to mention Debbie Neesham and Orla McNally, because I was doing a lot of this and they were covering me. So I acknowledge that today. Thank you very, very much. I know Debbie's not here. So there are travel costs, and usually the international institution pays for the travel and also pays for any vaccinations that the mentors might need. And mentorship really is the key to all this. What sets this program apart, I think, is the exceptional commitment and caliber of both the international and local mentors who engaged personally and professionally over 2 years to guide research and clinical care. Down in the right-hand corner there, you see Joe Ng. Joe's from Singapore. He's a fantastic guy. He's currently the chair of this program, and you can see what he has to say about supporting the relationships and supporting the mentors so that we make it as easy as possible for the fellows. So what have we achieved since Miami in 2015? 11,000 operations, 4,500 simple hysterectomies, 1,600 radical hysts, and over 3,500 lymphadenectomies. We have 52 graduated fellows, 42 fellows currently enrolled, 45 international mentors, 23 international sites, and 53 local supervisors. 695 tumor board sessions involving over 1,000 cases discussed. I'm sure you agree this is absolutely terrific. And it's taken only 7 years, and it's because of these international mentors that we've been successful. This is where we have in the purple are the host sites, and in the green are the training institutions, and in the orange you can see here India and China. Things are beginning to explode in India and China. We've got a couple of really dynamic young women who are driving programs there. We put in a separate administrator for those areas because I think it's going to be a really fast-growing country and region for us. So this is churning out the first ever properly trained clinicians in gynecologic oncology in these countries. Some of them have left their hospitals of origin, and in particular, 3 doctors from the Ethiopian Black Lion Hospital have gone to work in Rwanda, where there is a new medical school. I think the secret of success has been the leadership within the hospitals and the units, the local and international mentors, administrative support, national government support, regular assessment, and keeping in touch with the trainees in the program. Very important, we don't teach any of the trainees about immunotherapy. Completely inappropriate in sub-Saharan Africa. So the program is flexible and tailored to local needs. And sustainability is really important. We want fellows to continue in gynecologic oncology and become the trainers. The trainees become the trainers. And I'm glad to say that's happened. What are the challenges? Mentoring is a lifelong endeavor. It's the relationship between mentor and Telemachus. Now, mentor was a guy who looked after Telemachus. Telemachus' dad was Odysseus. He nicked off to the Trojan Wars, and mentor looked after Telemachus when he was away, and that's how we got the term mentoring. And it's a relationship where the trainer and the trainee move beyond the formal curriculum and into the shaping of a life and career of an individual that will make a difference in the lives of countless others. I think it's the most rewarding aspect of medicine that we can undertake. And if we do it well, it's a great legacy, and if we do it badly, it's a stuff-up and it's terrible. Funding it is very difficult. These programs, we don't know how long they're going to go in each institution. It's hard to sell an open-ended program. What are the KPIs? What are we trying to achieve? They're often fuzzy, they're lofty. We want the best for our patients and so on. And the return on investment from philanthropy is very difficult to define. So here we are. So 2017, the first fellow started. We have 52 graduates now from a wide variety of countries, as you can see, and it's growing at a reasonably fast pace. The leadership that you see here has been absolutely fantastic. Top left, Joanne Nigg, that we've talked about. Kathleen Schmeller is from MD Anderson, and she was a person that worked with me to get the curriculum up and running. Linus Chung and Tom Randall, top right and bottom left, both work in the States, and they are the current chairs. And down at the bottom is Mary Eichen, our CEO, and Susan Ralph, who's the administrator, who runs everything. She keeps a logbook, she organizes tumor echo, and all the rest of it. And as I said, we've just appointed someone to India to oversee the program there. So what's Australia contributed so far? Well, this is Paul Cohen. He's chaired our education committee. Orla's laughing. John Coulter's an Irishman. But John Coulter trained at the Mercy, so we are going to claim him as an Australian. And he trained with Peter. And all of you will, I'm sure, know Peter Grant. Peter Grant has led our palliative care committee for the last 3 years. When we had the global curriculum going, I got in touch with a woman called Anne Morris who ran Hospice Uganda. And she had drafted a manual, and we worked together and we used that as a palliative care program. Peter took this on board. He's developed 12 up-to-date modules, and it's really a very, very good program. ISGYP is the International Society of Gynae-Pathology. We partner with them in helping pathologists upskill in gynecological cancer. This is our pre-invasive leaders. Mila's from Brazil. Ida is a Glaswegian graduate who's now working in Malaysia. And you can see on the left there, we have two locals very active in there, Julia Brotherton, who's an epidemiologist, and our very own microbiologist, Suzanne Garland, whom I'll talk about. Over 550 individuals have been enrolled in this program so far in 100 countries. So it's becoming really successful in prevention. This is an old bloke in Fiji. Someone took the photograph. You might recognize it. It's David Reddy, head of our colposcopy and dysplasia clinic, and I thought this was a much better photograph. You might have sent me a decent photograph, Orla. What about nursing? This is Anne Mellon. Alan is a clinical nurse consultant in the Hunter Valley. She's in Newcastle, and she's put together a great team. And last month, a nursing curriculum was launched at IGCS in Dublin. Again, this is module-based, it's certificate-based, and fingers crossed that it's going to be taken up by the third world. What about radiation, Kailash Narayan? Well, as I've said, I think the model that we've developed is transferable to other specialties. And so what's happened is that these partners, ASTRO, American Association of Brachytherapy and Physicians, and IGCS have got together and developed a very similar program. The Marsden is going to be the first world hospital, and the Ugandan Cancer Institute is going to be the first third world hospital that's going to have formalized training through this curriculum. These are a few other people of Australian or kind of Australian origin who have come through the cancer unit of the Women's. They've, I think, in their own way, continued the legacy of Richard Tracy. This is Peter Sykes on the right, who spent 2 years with us, and Bryony Simcock on the left, who spent a year with us. They have been very active in Fiji, just in general gynecological and also in our fellowship program. Ailing Tan, you'll remember also, nurses at the back. Little Ailing's in Auckland. She's just about to retire, and she has been a dynamo. Absolutely amazing. And then we have Batman and Robin here, Deborah and Orla. And in the middle is Nanny, who was the first fellow in Fiji. She's now graduated. And I think the second fellow started, Orla, or the second fellow started. So that's great. Andy Garrett. Andy went back to work in Brisbane. You see here this baldy guy, this is Jim Nicklin. And they went out as a team to Fiji and Papua New Guinea and are still doing that. So Australia is really, I think, putting their hands up and doing a great job. Now, what else has the Royal Women's Hospital contributed? AOGIN is the Asia Oceania Research Organization on Genital and Infectious and Neoplasia. Down the bottom, you'll see George Clooney, Jeffrey Tan, and Suzanne Garland. We went there in 2000. We met up with the Thai ONG Society, and we said, let's get an organization for HPV testing, vaccination, screening, and treatment in the region. 5 years later, we had a very active organization. On the left there, you'll see in the arrow, that's Ian Fraser, who developed the vaccine. In the middle is Suzanne and George Clooney on the left. Here she is again in the middle at the latest meeting in Korea, in Seoul. At the back, this is Njau Te. We claim him as Australian too because he trained in Sydney. There's no Jeffrey Tan there because I think Jeffrey was in Tibet. And this is just a great opportunity for me to tell you about Jeffrey Tan. Where are you, Jeffrey? I'm going to embarrass you. Jeffrey has spent so much of his time in Asia at his own expense teaching about colposcopy, about vaccination, and about, at that time, smear tests and now HPV DNA samples. He has been the flagship, the flag bearer for the Royal Women's Hospital. And Jeffrey, I'm just so happy that I'm able to applaud what you've done, because it's definitely not been appreciated. There are 22 countries now involved in this society, and a lot of it is due to your schmoozing, Jeff. Well done. The International Papillomavirus Society is run by Suzanne Garland, a complete star. And what happened with us is that in the early 1990s, we supervised a PhD with Kit Fairley. And we were trying to work out how to do a self-test. And his dad, Ken Fairley, who was a renal physician, said, why don't you use tampons? Put the tampons into saline once they've been in the vagina, then test them for HPV, and lo and behold, it worked. So we started the first self-sampling, which I think we should be very proud of. Suzanne was very, very interested in the vaccine at that time, and we started the first vaccine trials of Cervarix. Interestingly, it was the late 1990s, and we didn't know how to get young women, teenagers, to volunteer to go into a randomized study. And I said to my older daughter, Natalie, I said, you get any ideas in this? And she said, Dad, you know, there's this thing that's just started, it's called Facebook. And so we actually got a Facebook page for the study, and this was the very first time that any media have been used to suck people into clinical trials, and now it's, of course, extremely common. Very quickly, EPIC is new. EPIC stands for Elimination Partnership in the Indo-Pacific for Cervical Cancer. It's a very important initiative because it's been funded by the Australian government, by DFAT, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, $12.5 million. And what it is there for is putting this group, Daffodil Centre, Cancer Council, here's the Australian Centre for Prevention of Cervical Cancer, the OVS, all Australians working to improve outcomes in the region. They've already been to Vanuatu with Ian Fraser. They've had 4 visits to Timor-Leste. They're going to PNG, Fiji, Tonga, and the Solomon Islands. These are the drivers. Karen Canfield, who's now AC, she leads the Daffodil Centre, an absolute dynamo, absolutely brilliant woman. And Marion Saville, who a lot of you will know, who originally was with PCS, now the Centre for Cervical Cancer Prevention. And Sancha Aranda, who works at the Peter MacCallum. She's the Jeffrey Tan, she's a networker, she's the schmoozer, she brings people together. She's got an absolutely fantastic network and has been absolutely 100% behind this whole project. So I will give you one example. This is the West Highlands in New Guinea. You can see no vaccination, no screening. So they started a test and treat model. Women would self-test, the sample would be tested almost immediately at point of care, treated with thermoablation, and registered via a mobile app. That's what happened. More than half of the women already have been screened, and nearly 95% of them have been treated, the ones who've had abnormalities. I think that's fantastic, and it's so simple. PAGO is another new one. PAGO is the Pacific Alliance for Gynecological Oncology, and it's finally being driven by the Australian Society of Gynae-Oncologists. So I'm very proud that the Australian Society has now come around to help fund work in the Pacific. And this is being run by this guy here. This is Michael Bourling. He was brought up in Tonga. He trained in Sydney. He's now a gynecological oncologist there. And you can imagine that he is just a fantastic advocate for women in the Western Pacific. And I see great things coming from this cooperation. I'm going to talk a little bit about Mongolia because the women's has had a great link to Mongolia. You can't recognize him, but 10 to 1, that's going to be Jeffrey Tan there. So Jeffrey went to Mongolia. When was it, Jeff? Late 1990s? Yeah. And introduced operative laparoscopy to them. Subsequent to that, we had a bunch of great doctors from the women's visit on a number of occasions, and you can see here Phil Popham, I think that's Kim Jansen, Emma Redman, and Samantha Hargraves. Don't they look gorgeous? So they've been on a number of occasions. It all fell apart in COVID, but I hear that it's going to start again soon. And this is the team, and I hope I've got everyone's names. If I haven't, I apologize. And if not, please let me know so that I can include it. Well, this is going to be my last talk. We have had a Mongolian pathologist come down to Melbourne. She's been trained specifically in cytopathology and has been part of the Mongolian team with colleagues from VCS. So the Women's Hospital, I think, has done a pretty good job in outreach for an area that is really underserved. And lastly, Fiji and the Peter MacCallum. Now, one of the problems we currently have in the absence of screening is that women with cervix cancer are presenting with late-stage disease. There are no radiation facilities in the Western Pacific. So if you want treatment, you have to fund your own treatment. Fiji has got, I think, about 3 or 4 potential routes into China and India for treatment, and that's it. So Tonga and the Solomons have had their health ministers recently visit China to say to the Chinese, can you do this on the cheap for us because we can't afford it? Because you can see the price of the cheapest care package in Australia, which is $78,000. 2 years ago, Pearlie Kaw, head of radiation oncology at Peter Mac, and I went to see Shelley Dolan. She was the CEO of the Peter MacCallum at that time. She was ex-director of nursing at the Marsden. And we told her the story and how terrible it was and that we wanted to do something about it. And she was fantastic. She took this on board, went to her board, went to her support team, and a pilot program has been set up for 6 patients. Now you can imagine how complex this is. Patient has to have the right diagnosis, potentially curable disease in Fiji. Fortunately, we now have our trained fellow, so we've got a gynae oncologist there. She has to have visas. She has to have an airfare. She has to be met when she arrives in Melbourne. She has to have accommodation. She has to have appropriate food. She has to be able to deal with side effects and so on. So this has been really difficult, and Pearlie Kaw really, I think, has done an outstanding job. And I have to thank both Shelley and Jason Payne, who has also been supportive as the new CEO of the Peter Mac. So this is Pearlie Kaw. Loves a chat, Pearlie, but is a fantastic driver of this program. What are we going to do when it finishes? I don't know, but we're going to do something. The lessons we've learned, I think, is that we, in the great tradition of Tracy and Maund, are punching above our weight. We learned that the approach to education and training in low and middle income countries has to be flexible and culturally appropriate to meet local needs. Great mentors are really the key, and local champions are responsible for generating the programs. You can understand there's still lots to do, and my biggest challenge is to work out some way, is this making a difference? In Africa and South America, less than 4% of countries have a cancer registry. So we don't know if we're going to impact either on incidence or mortality. So we have to use some other endpoint to work out if we're doing something that's valuable to our local communities. I don't think we've done that properly yet, and we're still working on it. So thank you all for coming on a Thursday night to listen for 45 minutes to something that I'm really passionate about. I think the Women's Hospital can hold its head up high. I think Victoria and Australia can hold their head up high. And I think we've been very fortunate to have a bunch of really great people at the Women's Hospital working on behalf of the region. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Professor Quinn. Truly inspirational talk. Yeah, I think we punch above our weight because of titans like yourself and Dr. Tan and others who really care about women's health. I'd like to invite questions, if there are any, to Professor Quinn. If not, I'll just have one question, if you don't mind. You've had an extraordinary impact on women's gynecological oncology care, particularly in low-income countries. As an early career obstetrician and gynecologist, I'm keen to understand what advice you'd offer to those of us who are just starting out. How can we maximize our impact on women's health, either locally or globally? Thank you.
I think that's a fantastic question, and I think it's all a matter of your networks. I think you have to go to international meetings. I think you have to sit down with people from disadvantaged areas, and you have to hear what their problems are, and you have to team with them in working out solutions. You can't do it in isolation. It's very much a team effort. I think if you can think of this program as a template for other programs, for instance, it would lend itself beautifully for advanced ultrasound training, Mark Umstad, or it would lend itself really well to advanced urogynecology training because it's a surgical specialty. So I think it's the networking that's important, but you need people who are motivated, you need local champions, you need a lot of enthusiasm, and above all, you need great colleagues, Orla McNally and David Brady. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So are there any questions? No, just me. Well, thank you for the advice. Well, to wrap things up, I'd like to present you with a plaque from us. Thank you.